Before grocery aisles and food delivery apps, medieval people had to get creative with whatever they could dig up, hunt, or scrape together. These 15 long-lost recipes weren't just cheap. They helped folks stay alive through freezing winters and empty fields. Some of them might even give your kitchen a few wild new ideas. Starting with pottage. Pottage was medieval meal prep before meal prep was cool. This humble dish kept people alive, a thick, hearty stew that bubbled away in the pot, hanging over the fire in most peasant homes. The beauty of pottage? Throw in whatever you had on hand. Barley, oats, peas, beans, turnips, leeks, and if you were lucky, a tiny scrap of meat or fat. Nothing fancy, just pure survival. The longer it cooked, the better it got. Families would keep their pottage going for days, even weeks, just adding fresh ingredients as needed. It was basically the original never-ending soup. The gift that kept on giving until someone accidentally dropped a shoe in it. This wasn't just convenient, it was smart eating. The slow cooking broke down tough vegetables and grains, making them easier to digest and releasing more nutrients. In medieval England, more than 70% of peasant meals featured pottage in some form. It wasn't just food, it was a daily ritual. The noble lords might have had fancy feasts, but the peasants had pottage, proving that even in the Middle Ages, the one-pot meal was king, just not the actual king. The flavor? Rich and complex from the constant simmering. The texture? Thick enough to stick to your ribs through a day of backbreaking field work. Sometimes it got so thick you could stand a spoon in it. Medieval engineers probably got the idea for cement by looking at week-old pottage. Modern nutritionists now say this humble peasant food was actually healthier than many of the fancy dishes eaten by nobles. Speaking of preserved foods that kept people alive through harsh winters, pickled herring was the medieval solution to food storage when ice boxes weren't even a dream yet. These small silver fish were caught by the thousands, then packed tightly into wooden barrels with layers of salt and vinegar. The result? A protein source that could last months or even years without going bad. By the 1300s, the Dutch had perfected this preservation method so well that pickled herring became their most valuable export. These preserved fish were so important to medieval Europe that entire wars were fought over herring fishing rights. Talk about taking your seafood seriously. The taste of pickled herring was strong, salty, tangy, and distinctly fishy. For most common people, this powerful flavor wasn't a downside. It was a blessing that made plain bread or potatoes much more exciting. The smell was memorable too. Walking into a medieval fish market was like getting slapped in the face by the ocean itself. From preserved fish to preserved nuts, medieval folks knew how to make food last without fridges. Pickled walnuts might sound strange today, but they were a medieval food preservation masterpiece. Unlike the brown, hard-shelled nuts we know, these were harvested while still green and soft, long before the shell formed. The young walnuts would be soaked in brine for days, then packed in spiced vinegar with cloves, mace, and pepper. Once prepared, they'd last for years without spoiling, crucial in times when food security was never guaranteed. The black, tender result had a unique taste, tangy, slightly bitter, with a texture unlike anything else in the medieval larder. What's remarkable is how this food crossed class barriers. Wealthy landowners enjoyed them as a delicacy, but they also became the original dumpster diving food for peasants who gathered fallen nuts from public lands. During the Middle Ages, nothing edible went to waste. A 15th century English household book warns that to waste food is to mock God's plenty. A medieval version of your grandmother telling you to clean your plate. Speaking of sweet memories, not everything medieval folks ate was savory. Honey cakes brought sweetness to medieval tables when sugar was a luxury few could afford. Made simply with flour, honey, and occasional spices like cinnamon or nutmeg, these treats were the closest thing to dessert that common folk ever tasted. Bakers would mix the sticky honey with flour, form the dough into small rounds, and either bake them in communal ovens or steam them over boiling water. The secret ingredient? Time. Honey cakes improved with age, developing deeper flavors as days passed. Clever medieval bakers knew this and prepared batches in advance for special occasions. Unlike modern cakes that go stale quickly, these dense treats stayed good for weeks, making them practical as well as delicious. While honey cakes appeared at weddings and feast days, they also had a darker side. They were traditionally served at funerals too, giving mourners something sweet to offset the bitter business of burying loved ones. Records from a 14th century abbey mention over 50 pounds of honey used annually just for funeral cakes. For the average medieval family, honey cakes represented rare moments of indulgence. Children might receive one on their saint's day or after the harvest was complete. The taste wasn't cloyingly sweet like modern desserts, but had a subtle complexity from the raw honey, which carried flavors of whatever flowers the bees had visited. Medieval honey cakes were so valued that some folks believed they contained magical properties. The only magic was how quickly they disappeared when nobody was looking. After enjoying something sweet, medieval diners often turned to creative ways of using every last crumb of food. Bread porridge was the ultimate way to rescue yesterday's loaf. This thrifty dish, also called panada, transformed rock-hard bread into a comforting meal. The cook would tear the stale bread into chunks, then simmer it with broth until it broke down into a thick, smooth porridge. Add herbs, a bit of fat, maybe an egg if you were lucky, and dinner was served. Bread was sacred in medieval culture, the staff of life. Wasting it wasn't just frowned upon. In some villages, it was actually punishable. Records from a small town in France show a baker who was fined and publicly shamed for throwing away unsold loaves instead of giving them to the poor or making panada. The average medieval peasant ate up to 2 pounds of bread every day, making bread porridge less a creative recipe and more like medieval damage control for their main food group. When bread went stale, which happened quickly, without preservatives, panada saved the day. The beauty of this dish lay in its flexibility. Royal court recipes show fancy versions with saffron, almond milk, and sugar, while humble village recipes used whatever broth was available, often flavored with foraged herbs or garden vegetables. The texture was smooth and silky, not unlike modern risotto, but made entirely with ingredients that might otherwise go to waste. Medieval bread porridge had the amazing ability to stretch a kitchen's resources so far that it would make a modern budget cookbook author weep with joy. Speaking of stretching ingredients in creative ways, medieval cooks also mastered the art of making simple food. Simple egg and herb tarts fed countless medieval families with minimal ingredients and maximum flavor. These small pastries were an early version of quiche, just eggs, herbs from the garden, and sometimes a sprinkle of cheese if you were lucky enough to have it. Medieval cooks created a basic dough from flour and water, pressed it into shallow pans, and filled it with beaten eggs mixed with whatever green herbs were growing nearby. The genius of these tarts lay in their adaptability. Spring tarts might feature wild garlic and young nettles, while summer versions would be bursting with parsley, sage, and thyme. Any leftovers from yesterday, a bit of fish, some roasted turnips, the last scraps of bacon, could find their way into these versatile dishes. Cooking happened right in the hot ashes of the fire or in small iron pans nestled among the coals. No fancy temperature controls, no kitchen timers. Medieval cooks judged doneness by look, smell, and their hard-earned experience. These tarts were basically the original portable meal, medieval fast food without the drive-through window. Women would make these tarts in the morning before fieldwork began and wrap them in cloth for midday meals. Men working far from home would unwrap these hearty treats hours later, getting a much-needed protein boost to power through afternoon labor. Records from a manor house in Yorkshire show its kitchen prepared over 100 herb tarts each week for workers during harvest season, proving how important these simple egg dishes were to keeping medieval labor forces fed. Like a medieval air fryer without the smug social media posts, egg tarts cooked quickly and fed many with little fuss. From protein-packed tarts to filling legumes, medieval meals often featured another affordable power food combo. The humble mixture of mashed beans and leeks might not sound exciting, but in medieval times, this dish was a nutritional powerhouse that kept bodies strong through the harshest winters. Broad beans, fat, protein-rich legumes, formed the base of this staple food. The beans would be soaked overnight, boiled until tender, then mashed with a wooden pestle until smooth. Leeks, those mild onion relatives that grow even in poor soil, were chopped and gently cooked in whatever fat was available, often just a scraping of lard or a splash of olive oil in Mediterranean regions. When combined, these simple ingredients created a filling meal that offered serious staying power. Medieval farmers couldn't take lunch breaks every few hours. They needed food that would fuel them from dawn until dusk. This bean and leek mixture did exactly that. What made this combo truly special was its availability to almost everyone. Beans could be dried and stored for years, while leeks were among the hardiest vegetables in the medieval garden, surviving even when other crops failed. Beans were so valuable that in parts of medieval France, tenants could pay their rent with bags of dried broad beans instead of coins. Possibly the only time in history when passing gas might have been considered legal tender. The nutritional value of this simple dish was remarkable. Modern analysis shows that a serving provided nearly half the daily protein needed by an active adult, plus essential vitamins and minerals lacking in most medieval diets. Beans held such importance that many villages maintained common bean fields where every family could grow their crop. Records from a 14th century English manor show that even during famine years, the bean fields were carefully tended and guarded. The combination was so filling that a medieval saying warned against eating beans before important meetings. No one wanted to be the person who cleared the great hall with their digestive after effects. For evenings when a change of pace was needed, medieval cooks often turned to drinks that could double as desserts or medicine. Take a sip of posset and step back in time. This curious concoction blurred the lines between beverage, medicine, and dessert. Medieval folks made posset by warming milk, then adding wine or ale to curdle it. The mixture was typically sweetened with honey and spiced with whatever was available: cinnamon, nutmeg, or ginger. The result? A warm, thick drink with soft curds floating in a sweet, tangy liquid. Posset gained popularity across all social classes for different reasons. The wealthy enjoyed elaborate versions in special posset cups with spouts for sipping the liquid while catching the curds with small spoons. Meanwhile, common households valued posset for its ability to use up leftover ale before it spoiled. Sweet, tangy, weirdly comforting, posset was like warm yogurt's unpredictable cousin that showed up at every family gathering, whether invited or not. The taste varied widely depending on the quality of ingredients, but most people found it soothing and satisfying. Beyond its culinary appeal, posset had a reputation as a cure-all. Medieval healers prescribed it for everything from the common cold to digestive troubles. A 15th century medical text recommends posset made with sage for treating fever and with rosemary for clearing the head. Grandmothers would push posset like it was a miracle cure, medieval Vicks vapor rub in drinkable form. Taverns often served posset as a nightcap, claiming it promoted good sleep and prevented hangovers. Though drinking more alcohol to prevent a hangover seems like flawed medieval logic. The tradition of posset remained popular for centuries, eventually evolving into the syllabubs and custards we know today. Some traditional British households still make a version of it for special occasions. When travelers needed nourishment on the go, however, they turned to heartier fare that could travel well. Long before plastic containers and Sunday meal prep sessions, meat pasties solved the medieval lunch dilemma. These handheld pies contained a filling of chopped meat, root vegetables, and herbs all wrapped in a sturdy dough shell. The dough wasn't just a container, but a preservation method. Sealing the filling from air kept it fresh longer. Contrary to popular belief, pasties weren't just for the wealthy. Common folks made them with whatever scraps were available. A bit of leftover pork, turnips, onions, and maybe some dried herbs. The wealthy versions might include venison, exotic spices, or dried fruits, but the basic concept remained the same: portable, preserved food. Medieval workers relied heavily on these convenient meals. Miners in Cornwall became especially famous for their pasties, which they took deep underground. The thick crimped edge of the pastry served as a handle that could be held with dirty hands and then discarded. This edible lunchbox was the medieval equivalent of those smug office workers with their matching glass containers, except miners were worried about mine shaft collapse rather than Instagram likes. The pasty played such a vital role in medieval life that it appears in household records across Europe. A manor account from 1300 shows that during harvest season, a single kitchen produced over 200 pasties in 1 week to feed field workers. When even meat was scarce, medieval kitchens turned to another low-cost option that packed impressive flavor. Forget fancy soup stocks. Onion broth fed medieval Europe with minimal fuss and maximum flavor. At its most basic, this kitchen staple consisted of thinly sliced onions simmered in water with a pinch of salt. Wealthier households might add a marrow bone or herbs, but even the simplest version provided remarkable sustenance and taste. Onions were among the easiest vegetables to grow and store in medieval times. Their long shelf life made them precious during winter months when fresh food was scarce. A single sack of onions could keep a family in broth for weeks when other options ran out. Medieval physicians valued onion broth for its supposed healing properties. Texts from the 1400s recommend it for treating coughs, reducing fever, and easing joint pain. Onion broth was basically medieval medicine. It might not cure you, but it would make everyone too teary-eyed to notice you were still sick. The biggest downside? Medieval kitchens doubled as tear gas chambers during preparation. With no ventilation beyond smoky chimneys, cooks probably spent half their time looking like they'd just watched a tragic play unfold. Also doubled as a natural eye cleanser, whether you wanted it or not. While onion broth made the most of vegetables, another medieval specialty proved that no part of an animal needed to go to waste. Waste not, want not reached its peak with medieval offal pies. These hearty dishes contained all the animal parts modern shoppers avoid: liver, heart, kidneys, lungs, and other organs mixed with herbs and enclosed in a rustic pastry crust. While it might make some modern diners squirm, these pies were practical, nutritious, and surprisingly tasty. When an animal was butchered in a medieval village, nothing went to waste. Meat was expensive, so common folk made clever use of every part. The organs, or offal, were actually some of the most nutrient-dense parts of the animal, rich in iron, vitamins, and protein. These nutritional powerhouses kept people healthy during harsh winters when fresh food was scarce. Preparing offal pie required skill. The organs needed careful cleaning and often pre-cooking before being chopped and seasoned with herbs, salt, and sometimes dried fruits or nuts to balance the strong flavors. The mixture was then wrapped in pastry and baked until golden brown. The eating experience was an adventure in textures, somewhere between a treasure hunt and a guessing game of what organ did I just bite into? Medieval dinner conversation starter: is this bit lung or is it liver? In 13th century London, records show that over 30% of butchered animals were used entirely, organs and all. Butchers would separate the offal specifically for pies and sausages, which became affordable protein sources for everyday people. These pies were so common that medieval doctors actually recommended them for specific ailments. Feeling weak? Eat heart pie. Trouble breathing? Try some lung pie. Having memory problems? Brain pie might help, or you might forget you ate it. While some preferred their animal parts hidden in pies, others enjoyed a more refined approach to humble ingredients. How did medieval folk enjoy cheese before pizza existed? Cheese and herb pie was the answer. Fresh curd cheese mixed with eggs and garden herbs in a simple flour crust. Unlike everyday meat pies, cheese pies were special treats made only when milk was plentiful in spring and summer. Medieval cooking manuscripts show these pies varied across Europe, with southern versions using olive oil and Mediterranean herbs, while northern recipes featured butter and chives. Cheese and herb pie was the dish you made when you wanted to impress guests but couldn't afford a feast. It was basically saying, look how fancy we are with our dairy, while secretly knowing it cost almost nothing to make. For breakfast on busy workdays, medieval folk needed something quicker that could be prepared ahead of time. Medieval breakfast was all about oat pancakes, the ultimate fast food when you needed to eat quickly before a day of hard labor. These rustic flatbreads were made from ground oats mixed with water and a pinch of salt, then cooked on hot stones beside the fire or on simple iron griddles. Unlike modern fluffy pancakes, these were thin, hearty discs designed to fill bellies and provide lasting energy. Oats grew where other grains failed, making them a lifesaver in northern regions with poor soil and wet weather. Scottish and Irish communities particularly relied on oat pancakes as daily staples. These weren't the Instagram-worthy maple syrup-drenched stacks we know today. They were the no-nonsense workout fuel of the medieval world. A fun fact, pancakes became especially important during Lent when fasting rules required creative cooking. Pre-Lenten pancakes used forbidden ingredients like eggs and fats before the 40 days of fasting began. While oat pancakes kept workers going, another medieval favorite brought warmth and cheer at the end of a long day. After a long day of medieval labor, nothing hit the spot quite like spiced wine, or hippocras as it was commonly called. This warming beverage took ordinary wine and transformed it into something special by simmering it with cinnamon, ginger, cloves, and sometimes honey. The spices masked the flavor of cheaper wines, allowing even modest households to enjoy a luxurious tasting drink. Medieval physicians claimed hippocras aided digestion, which conveniently gave people an excuse to enjoy it after heavy meals. Medical texts from the 1300s prescribed it for everything from stomach troubles to catching a suitable husband. Serving Hippocras at the end of a meal was the medieval version of "I deserve this." After eating bland pottage for days, a spiced drink felt like a reward for simply surviving another week without the plague. Speaking of warm comfort, medieval bakers knew that adding a special ingredient to bread could make it extra special. Brown ale bread turned a daily necessity into something special by using ale instead of water in the dough. This clever substitution resulted in a moister, better rising loaf with a slightly tangy flavor that medieval people found irresistible. The natural yeasts and sugars in the ale helped the bread rise more effectively than plain water, creating a fluffier texture. Medieval bakers discovered this technique out of practicality. Ale was often safer to drink than water in towns and cities where water sources were contaminated. Cooking killed any harmful bacteria, making ale bread both delicious and sensible. Yeast in medieval times was wild and unpredictable, literally foraged from the air or recycled from brewing. Ale bread was like having a backup plan when your usual yeast was feeling lazy or had taken the day off entirely. Brown ale bread remains one of the most practical food hacks from medieval times, proving that sometimes the best cooking innovations come from simply working with what's available.